As I've gotten older, I've found myself spending a lot less time playing games that are released for modern platforms, and more games released in years gone by. That's not surprising, honestly. I've never looked at gaming, or for that matter any creative medium, as a revolving door of new creations to be enjoyed in a temporary sense, but as an ongoing masterpiece forming an ever-growing pool of great experiences to enjoy. That's why I'm so big on the importance of preservation and so deeply concerned about a growing reliance on update servers undermining the concept of owning your hard copy games, which is the subject of a future video, by the way. 2022 has especially been a year of retro appreciation for me, not just in terms of all the actual retro games I've been playing, but even skewing toward new releases that are built in a retro style like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, or games from years gone by that are just now seeing their first Western release, like The Legend of Heroes Trails from Zero. I'm here today to talk about actual retro games, though. I've thankfully had an inordinate amount of time lately to go back and play some of my favorite games from some of my favorite gaming years, especially after my recent obsession with mini reproduction consoles and the modification thereof, which, if you've listened to SmashPad's Gamers Without Borders podcast during its initial run, you know all about. Even now, when I think back on the mid to late 90s, my mind fixates on fighting games and RPGs mostly, as well as, of course, the arcade racers I love so much. And then there was the Wipeout series, which was always just a little too cerebral and cumbersome to slide in next to the Ridge Racers and Sega Rallies of the world. And I say that with no criticism whatsoever. I simply mean that it didn't slot into the arcade racing genre. That didn't make it any less important to my gaming in those years, but perhaps its evasion of such classification worked against my long-term appreciation of it, and yes, that's all on me. See, if you were to ask me at any given time what my top 10 games of all time were, I'd probably tell you in no particular order, something like Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter Alpha 2, Capcom vs. SNK 2, Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown, Grandia, Final Fantasy VI, Lunar Eternal Blue, Outrun 2006, Ridge Racers 2, and Wave Race 64. I've been put to this question several times over the years, and although occasionally something else like Saturn Bomberman, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, or Phantasy Star Online would slip into the mix, the Wipeout series never did. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, there was just this impenetrable list of truly revered titles that I never included it in, and I'm starting to regret it today. I recently stumbled upon the complete history of the Wipeout series over at Slope's Game Room channel, which I highly recommend you check out, and I was immediately submerged in my own memories of that series and that era. And I really hope you'll indulge me for this next bit, as a lot of what I'm about to say will be me simply repeating my reply to Slope's video, and it provides backstory to what I'm actually here to discuss. Slope talked a lot about the experience of being introduced to the Wipeout series in the midst of the mid-90s UK club scene, and the interplay between that and the gaming culture that ensued. In contrast, here in the US, Wipeout was unleashed quite emphatically upon an audience that was entirely unprepared for it, prominently included on most of the earliest PlayStation demo discs, so this was a game Sony went well out of their way to put in front of American eyes. The internet wasn't really the internet just yet, so Wipeout was dropped on us entirely without context. There was no strong insight into its pedigree, we didn't know it was a deeply British product for a deeply British audience, it just had a very distinct style, and we, myself and the group of friends that I did most of my gaming with around that time, liked it. A lot. And it wasn't just my age group either. Once I managed to grab a PlayStation on layaway, the first question from my mother, an avid gamer in her own right, and someone who was completely blown away by that initial in-store demo, so when are we getting Wipeout? Being a fan of the series back then as an American was an odd feeling. I reiterate, the internet wasn't the internet as we know it yet, but anytime I would see Wipeout through the lens of gaming magazines or a small handful of fan sites dedicated to it, being a fan clearly made me a part of something bigger that I couldn't truly connect with. When I found my way to the Hackers movie back in high school and its soundtrack, and then MTV's AMP music block on Saturday nights back when MTV was actually about music, and Fluke's video for Atom Bomb that was featured on that show, which was basically a character tribute video for Aracom's Ariel Tetsuo, I started developing a sense of just how interconnected this all was. I just couldn't do too much about it in terms of getting involved with the fan base. I was, however, a part of a small group of friends who really got into the series, into it enough that link cable matches were possible, and over time we became a respectably solid team of Kyrex pilots, to whatever degree I can say that, without us having found any other groups of players in the area to compete with. Being as steeped as I was in the fighting game community, I always wished a similar, broader Wipeout community would emerge in the US, curious of what such a culture might look like. That disconnect also manifested as the odd misunderstanding, the most substantial being our idea that Wipeout 2097, rather than being another name for XL, was an entire third game that was being held out of the US market due to perceptions that it wouldn't sell well enough, because we were so accustomed to that treatment from Japanese developers and publishers at the time. And then Wipeout 3 Special Edition, my personal favorite today, came along, and well... Of course, I would be remiss to touch on this subject without addressing the matter of Red Bull, arguably the best and most effective instance of product placement ever in a video game. At first it felt like a creation by Psygnosis themselves, a Nuka-Cola of sorts for the world they had created. Once it was established that this was a real thing, Wipeout players caused the initial demand for the product in North America. Once a local indie games, music, movies store started carrying Red Bull, it became the default gathering point for local Wipeout players. Again, it's all interconnected. And then you see how involved the big three energy drink companies, Red Bull, Monster, and Rockstar, have become with real-life racing today, and it feels good having gotten in on what is basically the ground floor. Now, between the tepid, belated North American release of the disappointing Wipeout Fusion and just life in general dispersing that local group of players, Wipeout didn't stick in my gaming rotation the way other games mentioned earlier on in the video did, and that's the only reason I can think of that I didn't include it among the truly unquestionable favorites in my gaming life, such as Street Fighter, Virtua Fighter, and Grandia. This has all been to establish how important Wipeout was to my personal gaming practice, because now it's time to circle back to the point of the video. As previously mentioned, I've gotten deeply involved in modifying retro mini-consoles, and when it came time to load up my PlayStation Classic, the inclusion of Wipeout XL and Wipeout 3 Special Edition was never in doubt. This naturally led to long sessions of revisiting both games and wondering why the hell I fell away from playing them in the first place. After all, even without those other local players around to push my lap times up and my clearly deteriorated Kyrex skills as evidenced by my embarrassing XL play in the footage I cut for this video, I still get great joy out of experiencing this style of racing and being immersed in this world that Psygnosis built in the 90s. This time I'm more able to fully appreciate the quality of what I'm playing without having it attached to anything else, which may just be indicative of where I am in my life in general, but it still makes me realize I didn't appreciate it nearly enough the first time around, and makes me want to try to get back to the level of play I reached back in the day. Now I know the Wipeout series absolutely belongs among those other games that automatically come to mind when I think about my all-time favorites. It's been like playing them again for the very first time, which is a difficult, nearly impossible thing to accomplish if I'm being completely honest. It also makes me wonder how many other games are lurking in my library today that I thoroughly enjoyed but may not have fully appreciated at the time. It's something I'm definitely going to look into moving forward, but what about you all watching this video? Have you had a similar experience years or even decades after the release of a game you enjoyed at the time? Weigh in with the games you found a new appreciation for and how it all played out in the comments. I look forward to reading all of your stories about it. And that's all for now. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'm Patrick Mifflin, sounding off.